Imagine standing in the middle of a city. Not a village, not a camp. A city with straight, wide streets laid out in perfect grids, buildings of fired brick rising 2 stories high, indoor plumbing that would not be seen again in human history for thousands of years, and a marketplace so vast and alive that the noise of merchants, children, and cattle fills every corner of the air. Around you, more than 40,000 people go about their lives in one of the most organized, peaceful, and advanced urban centers the ancient world had ever known. Now imagine waking up one morning and finding the streets silent, the marketplace empty, the fires cold, the people gone. Not conquered, not burned to the ground, not swallowed by a sudden catastrophe that left bodies in the rubble. Simply gone, departed, dissolved into the dust of a civilization that would not be rediscovered for nearly 4,000 years, until the blade of a British railway surveyor's shovel struck something ancient and impossible beneath the plains of the Indian subcontinent. This is not legend. This is not myth. This is history, or rather, the ghostly outline where history should be, the story of the Indus Valley Civilization, one of the largest, most sophisticated, and most profoundly mysterious empires to ever rise and vanish from the face of the earth. If you've ever felt the pull of a mystery that cannot be fully solved, if you've ever stood at the edge of something ancient and felt the hairs on your arms rise, stay with us. Because what we are about to explore will change the way you understand human civilization forever. To understand what was lost, we must first understand what was built. And to understand what was built, we must go back to the very beginning, to a time before the cities, before the brick and the granaries and the great baths, to a landscape of unimaginable promise. The story begins roughly 7,000 years before the Common Era, in a region that stretched across what is today northwestern India, Pakistan, and parts of Afghanistan. The vast floodplain of the Indus River and its tributaries, a land of fertile soil, seasonal rains, and rivers swollen with snowmelt from the distant Himalayas. This was the cradle, the nursery of what would become one of the ancient world's 3 great civilizations, alongside Mesopotamia and Egypt. But unlike those better-remembered empires, the Indus Valley Civilization left no pyramids jutting above the desert, no temples carved with the names of god-kings, no papyrus scrolls listing the lineages of dynasties. It left something far stranger and far more haunting, a civilization of astonishing sophistication and yet almost complete historical silence. The earliest settlers of this region, the people of Murgar, named for the site where their remains were discovered in the Balochistan hills of modern Pakistan, were farmers and herders. As far back as 7000 BCE, they were growing wheat and barley, herding cattle and sheep, crafting tools from bone and stone, and burying their dead with care, placing alongside them small figurines and beads that suggest a spiritual life, a sense that something existed beyond this world. These were not primitive wanderers. These were thinking, feeling human beings laying the first stones of something magnificent. Over the centuries that followed, these communities grew. Trade networks developed along the rivers. Pottery became more elaborate. Villages became towns. And then, around 2600 BCE, something extraordinary happened. A leap so dramatic in scale and complexity that archaeologists call it the urban phase, the moment when the Indus Valley Civilization truly became a civilization. Within a few generations, cities appeared. Real cities. Cities like nothing that had existed before in this part of the world. Picture, for a moment, the city of Mohenjo-Daro as it stood at its peak, somewhere around 2500 BCE. You approach it from the east, crossing a low plain where farmers are tending their fields of wheat and cotton in the early morning light. The air smells of river water and cattle dung and burning wood. Ahead of you, the city rises, a massive citadel mound on the western side, its mud brick walls catching the first gold of sunrise, and to the east, the lower town sprawling for hundreds of acres, a grid of streets so precise that modern engineers have marveled at the planning that must have gone into them. You pass through the city's entrance. The main streets are wide enough for 2 ox carts to pass each other without slowing, and they run straight in perfect cardinal directions, north to south, east to west, as if the city were a map drawn on the earth itself. The houses that line these streets are made of standardized fired bricks. Every brick in this city, and in every other major Indus city, cut to the same proportions, a ratio of 1 to 2 to 4. A detail so precise, so consistent across thousands of miles, that it implies not just craftsmanship but a centralized authority that enforced standards of construction across an entire civilization. The houses themselves are remarkable. Most are 2 stories. They face inward, with blank walls toward the street and courtyards hidden within. A design that offers privacy, shade, and a sense of domestic peace. Narrow staircases lead upward. And here, perhaps most astonishing of all, the drains. Every house in Mohenjo-Daro is connected to a municipal drainage system, a network of covered brick channels running beneath the streets, channeling waste and rainwater out of the city. The residents of Mohenjo-Daro had indoor toilets. They had bathing rooms with sealed floors. They had running water. This was 2500 BCE. Egypt was still building pyramids. Mesopotamia's cities were only beginning. And yet here, in the Indus Valley, ordinary families were living with a sanitation infrastructure that would not be equaled in Europe until the 19th century of the Common Era. If you subscribe to this channel, you already know that we love pulling back the curtain on moments exactly like this. When history reveals something so astonishing it makes you question everything you thought you knew. If you're new here, welcome, hit that subscribe button, because there is so much more of this to come. At the heart of Mohenjo-Daro, on the raised citadel, stood what archaeologists call the Great Bath, a large, watertight pool of fired brick and a layer of natural tar, measuring roughly 12 meters long and 7 meters wide, surrounded by a colonnaded walkway and smaller changing rooms. It was clearly a public structure of immense ritual or civic importance, and yet no inscription, no royal decree, no priestly text explains its purpose. We can see the water. We can almost feel the heat of the Indus sun on the stone. But we cannot hear the prayers, if there were prayers, that echoed off its walls. This silence, this profound, aching silence, is one of the most defining features of the Indus Valley civilization. They had a writing system. More than 4,000 inscriptions have been found, carved onto small square seals made of steatite stone, etched into pottery, stamped onto clay tablets. These seals, and they are among the most beautiful artifacts of the ancient world, bear not only script but images. A seated figure in a yogic posture surrounded by animals, a unicorn-like creature before a mysterious object, a horned deity that some scholars have called a proto-Shiva. The script itself consists of somewhere between 400 and 600 distinct signs, more than enough for a complex written language. And yet, despite more than a century of effort by some of the greatest cryptographers and linguists in the world, the Indus script has never been deciphered. It remains one of the last great undecoded writing systems on Earth, a library of meaning locked behind a door for which we have not yet found the key. Because of this silence, we do not know what these people called themselves. We do not know the names of their kings, if they had kings. We do not know the names of their gods, though the evidence of ritual is everywhere. We do not know in what language they spoke, argued, prayed, or sang. What we do know, we know from the physical world they left behind. And that physical world tells us a great deal. The Indus Valley civilization at its height was vast. It covered an area of approximately 1.25 million square kilometers, larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. It encompassed more than 1,000 sites spread across the river valleys of the Indus, the Ghaggar-Hakra, and their tributaries. Its 2 greatest cities, Mohenjo-Daro in the south and Harappa in the north, a city of perhaps 20,000 to 50,000 people, were so large and so sophisticated that even their ruins, millennia later, strike a kind of awe into those who walk among them. Smaller but still remarkable cities like Dhalavira, Rakhigarhi, and Lathal filled out a network of urban centers connected by trade routes that stretched in every direction. And the trade was extraordinary. Indus merchants were not provincial figures selling grain between neighboring villages. They were players in an intercontinental economy. Carnelian beads from the Indus Valley have been found in the royal tombs of Mesopotamia. Indus-style weights and measures appear in sites as far away as the Persian Gulf. A trading post at Shortagai in northern Afghanistan suggests that Indus merchants ranged deep into Central Asia in search of lapis lazuli, tin, and other precious materials. Their standardized weights, perfectly cuboid stones carved in a precise binary system, were used across thousands of miles of trade networks, suggesting a commercial culture of remarkable consistency and sophistication. Consider the craftsmen in Lathal, a port city on the coast of what is now Gujarat in western India. Lothal possessed what appears to be one of the world's earliest dockyard, a massive brick-lined basin connected to a tidal river, large enough to accommodate seagoing vessels. Here, a beadmaker sits in a workshop in the early morning, heating carnelian stone in a kiln to soften its color from dull brown to vivid red, then drilling it with a slender copper drill, a process requiring extraordinary patience and skill, before polishing it to a gloss that catches the light like a drop of blood. These beads will travel by ship across the Arabian Sea to the ports of Mesopotamia, where they will be threaded on the necks of Sumerian royalty who cannot read the script of the people who made them. Think about that. The women of Sumer were wearing the work of Indus Valley craftspeople. The great cities of the ancient world were economically entangled in ways that no written record from either civilization fully describes. And yet the objects survive, lying in the soil like silent witnesses to a world of human connection and ingenuity that predates any empire we celebrate in our textbooks. What kind of society produced all of this? Here, the picture becomes genuinely revolutionary. There is remarkably little evidence of warfare in the Indus Valley civilization. No fortification walls of the kind that surrounded Mesopotamian cities. No large caches of weapons. No battle scenes depicted in art. No warrior kings commemorated in stone reliefs. The skeletal remains of Indus Valley people show almost no signs of trauma from violent conflict. The cities show no evidence of conquest, burning, or the kind of destruction that followed the sacking of ancient Mesopotamian or Egyptian cities. This does not mean the Indus people were without conflict. Human beings are never without conflict. But whatever form their political organization took, it does not appear to have been the military theocratic monarchy that defined most ancient civilizations. There are no grand palaces comparable to those at Knossos or Ur. If there were kings, they did not build themselves monuments. If there were priests, they did not carve their power into the walls of temples. Instead, what we see over and over again in every Indus city is an emphasis on the community. The granaries, massive, ventilated structures capable of storing enormous quantities of grain, were public institutions. The Great Bath was a public space. The standardized bricks that every household used suggest a uniformity enforced not by the whip of a slave master but by a shared civic culture of extraordinary coherence. Some scholars have argued that the Indus Valley civilization may have been organized not as a centralized empire under a single ruler, but as a loose confederation of city-states, perhaps governed by merchant councils or priestly assemblies, a world where power was horizontal rather than vertical, where the rights of the individual family to clean water and proper sanitation were, in some sense, guaranteed by the city's design itself. Whether that is entirely accurate, we cannot say with certainty. The seals remain silent. The script waits to be read. But the physical evidence of their cities, orderly, clean, functional, equitable in their basic infrastructure, speaks in its own way loudly of a society that valued the well-being of its people in ways that many ancient civilizations simply did not. Daily life in an Indus city was rich and textured. The markets would have been alive with the clamor of barter and exchange. Merchants laying out bolts of cotton cloth. The Indus people were among the first in human history to cultivate and weave cotton. Traders offering ivory combs and copper mirrors, jewelers displaying necklaces of gold, silver, faience, and carnelian. Children played with terracotta toys, small wheeled carts, figurines of animals, rattles. A child in Mohenjo-daro had a clay monkey on a string that could be made to climb up and down by pulling the ends. This toy was 4,500 years old when it was unearthed. It still works. The people themselves, from the skeletal evidence and the figurines they left, were a diverse group, varying in facial structure and stature in ways that suggest a multi-ethnic, cosmopolitan population drawn from different parts of the subcontinent and perhaps beyond. They wore cotton garments, dyed in colors we can only guess at. They adorned themselves with elaborate jewelry. The women especially, judging by the figurines, wearing heavy headdresses of shell and faience, multiple bangles on each wrist, long necklaces of carnelian and gold. They ate wheat, barley, lentils, sesame, and rice in the eastern sites. They hunted deer and boar. They fished the great rivers. They kept dogs, humped zebu cattle, water buffalo, and perhaps even elephants. They worshipped, of that we are certain, though the precise nature of their religion remains beyond our reach. The great number of female figurines found at Indus sites, terracotta women with elaborate headdresses and prominent features, suggests a veneration of a mother goddess or goddesses of fertility and earth. The famous Pashupati seal, found at Mohenjo-daro, shows a horned figure seated in a posture of meditation, surrounded by animals, an image so reminiscent of the later Hindu god Shiva in his aspect as Lord of Beasts that some scholars see in it a direct ancestor of one of the world's great living religious traditions. Whether this is so, whether Hinduism is in some sense the daughter of the Indus Valley civilization, remains one of the great open questions of ancient religion. What we can say is that the spiritual life of the Indus people was woven into the fabric of everyday existence, in the careful placement of ritual objects, in the architecture of the great bath that implies collective purification, in the animals that appear again and again on the seals as sacred or totemic creatures. This was a civilization not just of brick and trade, but of meaning. And then something went wrong. The signs of decline appear gradually, across the centuries between roughly 1900 and 1700 BCE. They are not dramatic at first. They are subtle, like the first hairline cracks in a wall that still looks solid from a distance. But they are there, and they are multiple, and they converge with a force that no civilization could withstand. We want to know what brought the Indus Valley civilization down. We want a single, clear answer: an invasion, a drought, a volcano, a plague. History rarely gives us that kind of clarity, and the Indus Valley civilization, with its stubbornly silent script, gives us less clarity than most. What it gives us instead is evidence, physical, geological, environmental evidence. And from that evidence, historians and archaeologists have constructed several compelling and not mutually exclusive theories. The first and perhaps most powerful is climate change. Specifically, the drying of the Gagarhakra river system, a river known in ancient Hindu texts as the Sarasvati, and once perhaps the greatest river in the subcontinent. Geological and satellite imaging studies conducted in recent decades have revealed the dried-up course of a massive river system running through the heart of the Indus civilization's territory, a river that once supported hundreds of Indus Valley settlements along its banks. Sometime during the late Harappan period, this river system began to fail. The monsoon patterns that fed it shifted. The rivers dried to seasonal trickles, then to dust. Imagine you are a farmer in a village on the banks of the Gagarhakra. 2 generations after the river's great flooding has begun to diminish. Where your grandfather planted wheat in soil made fat by annual floods, you are planting in ground that grows drier each year. The granary that once burst with surplus is half empty. The herds grow thinner. The children are quieter than they used to be. And then one morning, you look at the riverbed and see that the water has not returned from last year's monsoon. The bed is cracked mud, baked hard as brick beneath the summer sun. You make a decision that millions before you and after you have made. You pack what you can carry, you take your children, and you walk east toward the Ganges, toward any water you can find. This eastward migration, evidenced by the proliferation of smaller, simpler Indus-descended settlements in the Gangetic Plain during the late Harappan period, represents one of the great human movements of the ancient world. Not a conquest, not an exodus led by a prophet, but a slow, painful, generation-by-generation retreat from a dying landscape. The second theory involves the role of the great flood episodes that geological evidence suggests struck the Indus region during this period. The Indus River itself, always powerful, always prone to catastrophic flooding, appears to have produced a series of devastating inundations in the late Harappan period. Mohenjo-daro shows evidence of multiple rebuildings in its upper layers, each time with slightly inferior craftsmanship, as if the city was being rebuilt by people with fewer resources, less skill, or less collective will than those who had come before. The streets are not as straight. The drainage channels are not as well maintained. The bricks are not as consistently sized. Something is eroding, not just the physical city, but the civic culture and institutional knowledge that made such precision possible. A third theory, long popular but now more nuanced, involves the arrival of new peoples from the northwest, the Indo-Aryan migrations. For much of the 20th century, some scholars argued that the Indus Valley civilization was destroyed by an invasion of Indo-Aryan warrior tribes sweeping down from the Central Asian steppes, pointing to a famous passage in the Rigveda, the ancient Sanskrit hymnal, that describes a storm god named Indra destroying enemy fortifications. This theory, and the skeletal remains of individuals found in the upper layers of Mohenjo-daro who appeared to show evidence of violent death, seem to support a narrative of conquest. But the evidence does not hold up to modern scrutiny in its most dramatic form. The skeletons, when re-examined, were found to have been deposited at different times, not in a single massacre. There are no burned buildings consistent with military sacking. There are no arrowheads embedded in walls or gates smashed by battering rams. If Indo-Aryan peoples arrived in the Indus Valley region during this period, and the linguistic and genetic evidence suggests that some migration did occur, they appear to have arrived into a civilization already in severe decline, not to have destroyed a civilization at its peak. The truth, as is so often the case, is likely a convergence. Climate disruption disrupting the agricultural base, floods destroying infrastructure faster than it could be rebuilt, trade networks collapsing as cities declined and populations drifted east, and into this weakening, fracturing world, new peoples arriving and mixing with those who remained. Not a single killing blow, but a slow systemic failure, the way a great tree does not fall from one cut but from the accumulation of drought and disease and the gradual retreat of its roots from ground that can no longer sustain it. By roughly 1700 BCE, Mohenjo-daro was abandoned. Harappa was abandoned. The great dockyard at Lothal was silent. The wide straight streets were empty. The drainage channels, no longer maintained, filled with silt and rubble. The standardized bricks, those perfect 1:2:4 bricks that had been the backbone of a civilization, were taken apart and reused or left to dissolve back into the earth from which they had been fired. The people did not disappear. Let us be absolutely clear about that. The descendants of the Indus Valley civilization continued to live and breathe and love and struggle. They moved east, they mingled with new arrivals from the northwest, they carried fragments of their culture into the Vedic civilization that rose in the Gangetic Plain in the centuries that followed. Some scholars argue that the roots of yoga, of certain ritual purification practices, of the reverence for cattle that would become so central to later Hindu tradition, all of these may have their origin in the Indus Valley world. But the civilization, as a coherent urban entity, as a world of planned cities and civic drainage and standardized weights and merchant fleets crossing the Arabian Sea, that world was over. And here is what makes it so haunting, so achingly mysterious even now, standing on the far side of 4,000 years of human history. They left almost no trace of themselves in any other civilization's records. The Sumerians, who traded with them, called them the people of Maluha, a distant land of exotic goods, but wrote almost nothing about them. The Vedic texts that emerged from the civilization that succeeded them do not clearly remember them. They did not carve their story in stone. They did not bury their rulers in monuments designed to last forever. They built their great cities from brick, permanent enough to outlast their builders by millennia, but not dramatic enough to demand the reverence of those who came after. They were, in a sense, too practical for legend, and so they were forgotten. For nearly 4,000 years, the name Mohenjo-daro did not exist. The words of their language, whatever those words were not spoken. Their seals lay in the soil beneath the feet of farmers and herders who had no idea they were walking above one of the greatest civilizations in human history. Until 1921, when a young Indian archaeologist named Daya Ramsani, working at a site called Harappa in the Punjab, began to find strange objects beneath the soil. Fired bricks, seals with unknown writing, figurines of a sophistication that seemed impossible for a site of this apparent age. And then, the following year, at a site 200 miles to the south, a British archaeologist named R.D. Banerjee found something similar beneath the ruins of a Buddhist stupa at a place the local people called Mohenjo-daro, the Mound of the Dead. The excavations that followed were among the most consequential in archaeological history. Layer by layer, season by season, the forgotten world of the Indus Valley civilization was pulled back into the light. The Great Bath was uncovered. The granaries, the streets, the houses with their bathrooms and their drains, the seals with their undeciphered writing and their strange animals. And the more that was found, the deeper the mystery became. Because here was a civilization that had no precedent in the historical imagination of the modern world. It did not fit the model of ancient despotism. It did not fit the model of a temple state or a warrior kingdom. It was something different, something that our categories of ancient civilization were not built to contain. And because its writing could not be read, it could not speak for itself. It remains, to this day, in that position, extraordinary, undeniable, and deeply, stubbornly silent. If this story is leaving you with as many questions as answers, that's exactly how it should feel. The Indus Valley civilization is not a mystery that yields to simple explanations, and perhaps that's what makes it so compelling. Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments below. We read every single one, and there is genuinely no settled consensus on some of these questions. Your perspective matters. What can we say, finally, about the Indus Valley civilization, about what it means, what it was, what it lost, what it left? We can say that it was one of the greatest experiments in human organization that the ancient world ever produced. At a time when most of the world's people lived in small agricultural villages or nomadic bands, the inhabitants of the Indus Valley built cities that would not be matched for civic sophistication in that part of the world for thousands of years. They solved problems, the problem of waste management, the problem of flood control, the problem of standardizing trade across enormous distances, with a practicality and an elegance that commands genuine admiration. They appear, from the evidence available, to have done this without the coercive apparatus of a military state, without god-kings demanding tribute in blood and labor. Whether that appearance perfectly reflects reality, we cannot say. The script is silent. But the cities themselves argue for a people who took the business of living together seriously, who understood that a city is a collective project and that its infrastructure is a form of justice. We can say that they were artists of the first order. The bronze figurine known as the Dancing Girl, found at Mohenjo-Daro, depicting a slender young woman with one hand on her hip and bangles running up her left arm, her face tilted upward with an expression of composed self-possession, is one of the most perfect small sculptures of the ancient world. She is real. She is present. She looks at you across 4,500 years with the calm authority of someone who knows exactly who she is. We can say that they were traders, engineers, farmers, craftspeople, mystics, and parents. That they loved their children, fed their families, quarreled with their neighbors, prayed to their gods, and went about the daily business of being human with the same mixture of ordinary struggle and occasional transcendence that characterizes every human life in every age. And we can say that they vanished. Not all at once, not in fire and conquest, but slowly over centuries, as the world they had built upon changed beneath their feet. As rivers dried and floods came and the great web of trade and urban life that had held their world together frayed and finally came apart. They are gone. Their language is gone. Their gods are, to us, nameless faces on carved stones. Their kings, if they had kings, left no inscriptions boasting of their power. And yet they are not entirely gone. Somewhere in the deep memory of the civilization that grew up after them, in the ritual purifications, in the sacred bulls, in the meditative figures carved into seals, in the cotton fields of the Indian subcontinent, in the very shape of the urban planning of ancient cities, somewhere in all of that they persist. Every civilization that rises and falls leaves something behind. Not just ruins in the ground, but traces in the living world, echoes too faint to hear clearly but too persistent to be entirely silent. The Indus Valley civilization built the most advanced cities of its age and forgot to leave us the password to read their names. They built drainage systems that worked for centuries and never told us what they called the engineers who designed them. They traded with the known world and left no merchant's diary. What they left us is something stranger and more durable, the shape of their streets, the perfection of their bricks, a dancing girl in bronze, and 4,000 inscriptions in a language no living human being can read. They are the great unanswered question of the ancient world. And perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps a civilization that seems to have valued the community over the ruler, the practical over the monumental, the living city over the eternal inscription. Perhaps such a civilization deserves exactly this kind of immortality. Not the loud, burning immortality of conquest, but the quiet, haunting immortality of mystery. They built something extraordinary. They lived. They vanished. And 4,000 years later, we are still asking, who were they? What did they know? What did they say to each other in that undeciphered script as their rivers dried and their cities grew quiet? We are still listening. If this journey through the ancient Indus Valley moved you, shook something loose in your understanding of what civilization means, please share this video. These stories deserve to be heard. and every share brings this lost world to new eyes and new minds. Like the video if it brought the ancient past alive for you. And subscribe if you want to keep going down these roads, because there are more lost civilizations, more vanished empires, more unanswered questions waiting for us, and we are just getting started. The Mound of the Dead is still out there, in the plains of Sind, its highest brick courses rising from the soil into the open sky, silent, patient, and waiting for the question that will finally unlock its secrets. Until that day, we remember them the only way we can, by telling their story. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and turn on notification for more documentary stories.